What will happen to us after we die? Some say we just become worm food, and many others turn to religion for the answers. But are they right in doing so? The idea that my grandfather is now just a pot of ashes in the ground isn't a pleasant image, and it almost makes me want to hope that there's a heaven for him to go to. As a firm believer in science and logic, I simply can't see how a heaven could exist for his soul to go to. In this show, I'll explore the idea of an afterlife through talking to different religions. What is heaven like for them? And ultimately, how can you get there? The first on my list is Christianity. Can belief alone send you to heaven? And what does it look like?
It's one of those questions, do I believe in heaven? Is yes, absolutely, and there's an enormous question with lots underneath it.
Well, what is your idea of heaven?
It's frustratingly vague to some people, my idea of heaven. Scripture gives us wonderful, tantalizing bits and pieces and images, and we echo that in the hymns and the poetry and the readings and the worship we do here. There is this beautiful sense of growing closeness with God, but it's not about earning those heavenly points. And that gets in as well to a theology of grace, is that we can't force our way into heaven by being good. And I think because of that, we can't make getting into heaven be our motivation for following that way that Jesus showed. So,
do you believe that once you get to heaven, you will communicate with God?
Absolutely, and communicate's a lovely word, because of course we do communion here at church, here at Great St. Mary's every Sunday, and as that idea of communion, of community, of closeness. What I dislike are the images of heaven that look extraordinarily boring and slightly spooky and ghosty. This idea that Family Circus is this American cartoon where I'm going to be brutal about this, the dead godparents are these odd little ghosts looking sweetly over their shoulders, and I actually find that kind of creepy.
So you don't think of it as a physical place?
Ooh, that's a dangerous question. Time and all of the other dimensions are creatures of God. So I can't point to heaven or find it on GPS, so not physical in that way, but not unmaterial either.
So who can go to heaven, and how can we get there? Rather than asking a spokesperson of the church, I wanted to know what an ordinary believer thought.
I don't like the word heaven because I think people often have different views of it and preconceptions about it. So I think it can sound quite airy-fairy and spiritual, and everyone's just floating around doing nothing. Whereas I think that the Bible makes it really clear that it's going to be really real. So we're going to be able to feel things and touch things and smell things, and it's just going to be so much better than we could ever imagine this world to be. So I think that's what happens.
Do you think that being a Christian and knowing that you'll get judged has changed your behaviour in any way?
Yeah. So I think as a Christian, I believe that I became a Christian because I realised that I had turned away from the way God had sort of created this world, had wanted me to live, but that Jesus' death was a sacrifice on my behalf, and so I don't have to do anything to get that salvation. I didn't do anything to get into heaven other than accept that Jesus is God and is Lord of my life, and say sorry for not believing that before, and then just asking him to accept me.
If heaven is so important, why isn't it brought up more often?
We really, really want to be talking about heaven more because that's the most exciting thing that's happening going to happen in our lives. And I mean, people don't want to, also people who don't necessarily have a clear idea of what's going to happen, it's scary. The unknown is one of the scariest things in life. So yeah, I can totally understand why you wouldn't want to talk about it, but I think it's great because I think I know what's happening, so yeah.
So far, I've only heard ambiguous interpretation and passionate conviction in an ancient text. It seems to me that to believe in a heaven, I must blindly follow a faith. Surely in our modern era, science has a rational answer. Indeed, is it possible to be a Christian and a scientist? I'm heading to the Faraday Centre at Cambridge University to speak with Dennis Alexander, a scientist, author, and most importantly, Christian. What difficulties have you found in balancing faith and science?
Personally, I haven't actually, no, and I think Probably for various reasons. My mother actually was one of the early women who read physiology at Oxford in the late 1920s, okay? She was one of the first, I think possibly the first woman to actually study physiology at that time. And she came from a strong Christian background, and there was a very strong emphasis at that time in many Christian communities on the education of women. So they sent them all off to Oxford and Cambridge and places and tried to get them well educated in the sciences. So she read physiology in Oxford. So I was raised in a home which was full of Christian faith, and also a home full of enthusiasm for science. Well, certainly I've been in the biological research community for 40 years. So I've never found any particular problem between my science and my faith, to be honest. I have had some ethical challenges, okay. Particularly when I was working, I helped to set up the National Unit of Human Genetics in Beirut, in the American University Hospital way back. And there, of course, that involved prenatal diagnosis, involved abortions of the fetus that was carrying a genetic disease that would lead to their early death if they were born. And so that obviously raised ethical issues. And I guess that's been the main challenge for me as a Christian, to think through some of the applications of science, some of the ethical issues. Of course, that's a challenge for everybody. It's just that I came to the table with Christian principles and understanding in my mind when I was thinking about that.
Are there certain scientific fields that would clash with Christianity, for instance, evolutionary biology?
No, well, I don't think so. I mean, I've always been a passionate Darwinian. I've always believed in evolution ever since I can remember doing evolution, and I've never thought it had any particular clash with faith myself. I mean, and as a matter of fact, I never even found anybody who had a different opinion until my late 20s when I was overseas, and I found an American who was a Christian and who didn't believe in evolution. I go, what? You know, like something, what's that about? Okay, so it was quite a novel experience for me in later life to meet Christians, especially from America, okay, who don't believe in evolution. I just found that really puzzling. I don't know why that is, but that's just a fact, you know, about life in America, okay.
Dennis definitely didn't seem to have an existential crisis from the crossover of his work and his beliefs, which, to me, is convincing that the concept of a heaven doesn't need to contradict with my trust in scientific belief. But is the lack of evidence too much to ignore? What would be your definition of atheism?
Atheism is a lack of a belief in God or gods. There's no evidence for God, therefore I don't believe in God. And I'm a scientist, so with everything in my life and my approach to science as well, if there's no evidence for something, then you shouldn't believe in it and you shouldn't make claims about it.
What do you believe happens after we die?
When we die, our thought is going to be exactly the same as how it was before we were born. You won't know that you're dead, you won't know that just like you didn't know that you weren't born. It will be a state of non-existence. I think the general idea that like scientists in the know would say is that our consciousness is linked to our brain, so there's a physical basis for our consciousness. So, you know, you decompose when you die. Obviously, there's no physical basis for your thoughts anymore. And humanism is the idea that we only have one life, so we should make the best of it, and we shouldn't have any kind of religious texts that dictate why we should be good.
Why do you think people are drawn to the idea of a higher power?
I mean, you're asking what people draws to it, what could be comforting about it. Yeah, obviously it's comforting, the idea that when you die, you know, you don't just get eaten by worms and disappear, and you go somewhere where it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I can see how that can be comforting. As a human, you are like fundamentally altruistic and you don't want to hurt people. That's better than only stopping yourself from doing all of these horrible things just because you're worried about going to hell.
To me, the motivation of becoming a good person just because I might benefit from it seems selfish. But the truth is, we don't know what happens when we die, so telling others that they're wrong seems a bit bizarre. So the Christian version of heaven seems pretty good, you know, you get this eternal salvation, you get a chance to communicate with God, and it doesn't take too much effort to become a good Christian. You just go to church every Sunday and have full faith in Jesus. But I was already quite familiar with that, so I want to try a religion that I'm less familiar with, which would be Islam. So I'm going to go visit a mosque to speak to an imam.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, ashhadu la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, hayya ala salat, hayya ala al falah.
So, Billy, welcome to the Cambridge Mosque.
The So you need to take your shoes off on the way in as well?
Yeah, actually, there is not any ruling to have to compulsory you not to use your shoes, but we do our worship on ground, so we have to, for the cleanliness purpose, we put off our shoes inside of the masjid.
And you just use this for washing your feet?
Yeah, ablution actually not only washing feet, we have to wash certain parts of our body. Main parts of the body are our face and our arms and feet as well.
I seem to have arrived at the perfect time. The Imam has just started the lunchtime prayer with his congregation.
Sami Allahu liman hamida. Allahu Akbar.
Afterwards, I thought I'd ask the Imam to try it out myself.
Allahu Akbar. So Billy, follow me, actions. We say, raise your hands and fold it like that. Allahu Akbar. All right? So then we read Quran and few verses of Quran. After that, we say, Allahu Akbar. Lord is great. Subhana Rabbil Azim. Subhana Rabbil Azim. Sami Allahu liman hamida. Rabbana lakal hamd. Then Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. All right?
That's it. What is the idea of heaven in Islam?
Allah says heaven is a place where is all your desires will be fulfilled and nothing bad happened there, and he have all the years, all comfort there, and he has eternal life there. So as Quran says again and again, Quran says that is the place, you may say utopian place, the place where is no worries, no miseries, no sadness, no crime, no sin, and people live in harmony because there is no enmity. All the bad desires finish there, and all the blessings and bounties there. What a person wish, Allah give this is a place called heaven.
Do you need to be a follower of Islam in order to get into heaven?
You know what happened? Allah is the owner of heaven and hell. I'm not the owner. Yeah. So the decision would be in the hand of Allah. Allah knows that who is a worthy of hell and who is a worthy of heaven. Allah knows in Islam, intention is very important. Intention is a niyyah. What I'm thinking inside. Allah knows what is inside of the heart. It is in the hand of Allah. I cannot say anything. Who will go to hell and who will not go to hell, who will go.
I thought that was incredibly enlightening. Learned a lot about Islam today that I wouldn't know otherwise. And his version of heaven sounded pretty cool, not gonna lie. It was just pure bliss, really, which sounds pretty good. And you don't even need to go to the toilet. The message I received from the mosque was very similar to what I heard from the Christian churches. Heaven is a magical place where everything is great and you'll be judged by someone before you get in. But what are some of the real alternatives? What does being a spiritualist entail?
Fundamentally, most religions have some concept of a life beyond this. Spiritualism is slightly different because we accept that life continues beyond the physical world, but we actually are an evidence-based religion, which means that as well as claiming that, instead of just believing it, we provide evidence to prove that through the work of mediums and mediumship.
Is there any proof of your version of the afterlife?
Evidence is something that is very much a personal thing for each and every one of us. Through making a contact with the deceased person, we are able to bring back all manner of information, sometimes very personal information, to the recipient.
At this point, I just had to ask for a demonstration.
Within spiritualism, we have a practice called Spiritualist Healing. The power of the healing comes from the spirit world through the healer to the patient. And even when a person is facing death, healing can still help. So just allowing myself to just change my awareness, and in doing so be aware that the power, the energy is beginning to flow. It just brings with it a great sense of calmness. There is no actual need to physically touch the patient. The energy just flows. Healing can bring a great sense of calmness. It can just make life easier to deal with at times.
Now, some mediums work as what we would call a psychic artist, and some of them have never actually picked a paintbrush or a pencil or anything up. They've never actually been an artist, but Spirit do actually encourage them to pick up something, and they will draw pictures. I've got one here of my grandmother, and this was drawn by an artist, and you can see there is a likeness there. There's a picture of my grandmother here. It's just a mirror image. Her parting is slightly on the other side. I had no doubt this was my grandmother when this was done. So I knew that that person who was drawing had not a clue. They would never have known my grandmother. So it had to have come from somewhere from, namely the spirit world.
So what do you believe happens after we die?
I know beyond any doubt through the evidence that I've received that when we leave this world, the physical body just drops away, and the spiritual reality that is you, that is every single person in this world, continues into the spirit world.
So spirits stay here on earth?
No. I think it's difficult to think about exactly where people go. We are existing in the physical dimension, but the spiritual dimension is all around us.
So how does what you do in this world affect what happens in the next?
We don't believe in any form of judgmental God. Our principles talk about the eternal progression of every human soul. So what we do in this world, the way we live in our life, if we do good, if we bring a positive approach, then that does affect the dimension that we will move to when we leave this world.
So do spiritualists and non-spiritualists go to the same place?
Yes.
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 I don't think I'd join a spiritualist church. I'm not sure I was quite convinced. It seems like a little bit of hocus pocus, but the guy did seem very into it, and obviously a full believer of it, given that he said that what he knew was true. He knew it to be true. He didn't believe in anything. He knew this as a fact. So clearly there has to be some sort of evidence that it has worked in the past. Beneath me is Castle Mound. At 25 metres above sea level, it's the highest point in all of Cambridge. Now, if the traditional idea of heaven being in the sky is correct, then this is the closest physically that I can get to it. Now, despite the lovely view here, I don't actually feel any holier. Drawing our journey to a close, the last religion I'm interested in is paganism. I quite like the idea of life after life, but what do they actually believe in? Thanks for joining us, guys. Robin, if I could start with you, and could you just briefly describe your faith?
I came to Druidry through polytheism. Not all Druids are polytheists, which is worth noting. You do get some Druids who are Christian, some who are atheists, some who are Jewish, and so on. So for me, polytheism is the worship of many, many gods and goddesses. So I was drawn to it through Irish mythology and Welsh mythology.
What do you believe happens after we die?
I don't know if everyone reincarnates, that would be a bit presumptive to assume everybody does, but I believe I will, and I certainly expect quite a lot of the people I know to reincarnate. The tradition described by Julius Caesar about the Iron Age tribes in Gaul was that they believed in transmigration, which is the notion that you can reincarnate as something other than a human being. So whereas some religions believe that once you're a human, you are always a human. Transmigration is more akin to the Hindu belief that you can come back, that you're a soul, that you can come back as a human, as a cat, a dog, a horse, a tree, what have you, as something different from what you are now. So you are a soul transiting through a body, and this is just one body of many.
Are there any rituals that Druids perform?
Almost all of it is outdoor based. I know obviously sometimes we're lucky today, the weather is good, and if it's bucketing down, certainly if you've got an elderly Druid, they would be indoors out of common sense. You know, there's no holiness in pneumonia. But the idea is to tune into the world around us, to the natural cycles of the planet, the plants, the trees, the animals, the shifting tides if you're down at the beach, to understand the land you are on.
Does what we do in this life affect what happens to us in the next?
Absolutely, both not only in the future incarnations but also the remainder of this lifetime, in that each action has a consequence, a reaction. As with the Vedic paths, I do believe that can carry over from the end of this life into the start of another.
So, James, could you briefly describe your faith?
I find it unlikely that we die and there's nothing. I see it as there's an infinite number of possibilities of things that happen when we die, and there being nothing that happens is very unlikely due to that. I like to believe in reincarnation. I tend to go with what I hope happens, and I fully accept that.
Ian, could you briefly describe your faith?
Everything in the universe, according to the theory of Big Bang, was here and always will be here. So to say that when you die you go to heaven is one thought from many different religions, but for me nothing really does happen when you die. You just get enveloped. And it sounds very cold, doesn't it? But I think if every atom that has ever existed in the universe is here and always will be here, then in some way that I will always be here and always have been. It's an interesting idea that it detaches itself from our body and goes somewhere else where we can live forever. I think that is a wanting for humanity to live forever, and something that people find hard to come to terms with when you die. I feel that personally, once I'm gone, I'm gone. That is it. And my physical body and being, I suppose, will exist on this planet until it burns up. But could that be incorporated with my consciousness as well? No one really knows what consciousness is, do they? So it's hard to say.
This whole experience has confused me even more. I thought I would find some answers talking to many religions, but it's actually left me with more questions. If you believe in heaven wholeheartedly, how can you not know what it is? It's clear to me that most people desperately want something to happen when we die. Talking about death has made me appreciate life more. So instead of rejoicing that my grandfather has gone to heaven, I'll celebrate his life instead, wherever he may be.